All right. Well, thank you, Cindy, for that. Thanks for hitting the record button. We're actually going to go into our opener here and really appreciate everyone's time today for jumping on. We know it's in the middle of the week as well as during our virtual conference. So we're really excited to be with all of you. As always, my name is Newlyn Wing. I think I know most people on the call, but really had the pleasure in the last few months serving as a chief strategy officer at the national level to work with the board on a lot of different things. And the topic that we're going to talk about today came up because there's a lot of things going on in the last year, and especially with all of us really having to make the transition to virtual, that made sense to really kind of talk about this topic. But before we get into really the nuts and bolts of what we're talking about, and before we introduce our panel and go through some ground rules, I just wanted to share, I just want to thank the board and Cindy for all their support of the chapters. Really the genesis of this webinar and hopefully of the series as we move forward was that the board members are always looking for ways to support the chapters. And so this kind of came up around the objective that they really want to provide insightful insight and resources for members to grow both in their NAAAP capacity as well as their personal and professional realms. And so again, just want to thank the board for that because they've been very proactive in wanting to do things like this. And I was really happy to work with them to really moderate this and deliver it. But really it's the board insight that we're going to be looking to really dig into today. And this will be a part of a series, hopefully, of different topics that we cover that are requested by the chapters, as well as things that the board or Cindy or anyone else for that matter really sees being pertinent to the chapters and really providing our leadership the skills as well as the insight again into delivering on the mission and everything else that goes along with that. And so with this topic, today we're talking about speakers, programs, and really how we vet those. That's come up because, again, with us, there's been a lot of opportunities and there's been a lot of great things happening in the last year and a half. And special thanks to Junann and Marinka and Will for really facilitating a lot of collaboration among the chapters with the President's Council. There's been a lot of connection of, I've been to events in Minnesota, I've been events to, in San Francisco virtually. And with that, there's a ton of opportunity, but there's also some things that we want to make sure that we're looking at as we do more programming across state lines, nationwide, and all that good stuff. And so this certainly won't be a one-off topic. We're really excited again to really get feedback from the chapters, feedback from our President's Council leadership to create topics and create webinars like this that pertain to things that you all want to hear from. And before we get into the fun topic and all the nuts and bolts of what we're talking about, let's just go over a quick schedule and some ground rules. And so our schedule today is very straightforward. I'll have the pleasure of introducing our panel. We'll learn about something about their background, and then we'll move into a panel discussion. We have some common questions that really pertain and really speak to their well of knowledge and their experience in this area. And then we're going to leave some time at the end for question and response. And so really, like we did at the beginning, if with our Netflix question, if you have anything you want to talk about, if you want to raise a question, if something that gets said really piques your interest, then be sure to put that in the chat because we'll be looking at that a lot as we move forward here, which is one of our ground rules of using the chat. And so again, if you like something that was said or you want to hear more about something, please let us know in the chat. The other two ones are very simple. Assuming positive intent, this is something that I know I've had a great conversation with our board about we all want NAAAP to be the best it can be and to bring our organization to a new level. And so if you hear something on here that you agree with, or you're like, I'm not sure about that one, again, use the chat for that. And if you want clarification on something, we'll certainly assume positive intent as we move throughout the hour. And we are going to try to keep it to an hour. There's a good chance we don't get to every question that might come up during our time together today. But again, this will be just one series of many with the board. And we're looking forward to, again, tapping into their knowledge, into their expertise and experience with different topics. And so with all that being said, without further ado, let's meet our panel. And so we're going to start with Kim. And so I'll read off a couple of quick sentences here, and then I'd love for each of you to say a sentence or two about yourself. And so Kim has been with us for a few years now, and she is in the HR realm with healthcare, actually, in Dallas, Texas. And Kim, would you mind unmuting and introducing yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Newlyn. Thank you, everyone, for being here and squeezing us in today. So I've been in HR over 20 years. I actually started my career as a social worker, which is amazing, amazing skill set to have in this space nowadays. But I've been part of NAAAP for, gosh, I want to say 15 plus years. I'm one of the founding members of the Dallas NAAAP chapter. So happy to share some insights and hopefully some creative horror stories that will help you as you engage in this topic of speaker selection. So thanks.
Fantastic. Thank you, Kim. Moving right along, we have Mr. Michael Gonzalez. And so Michael Gonzalez is a DE&I consultant. I had the pleasure of hearing him speak at the Kansas City convention a couple of years ago. And there's a lot of things on here. Michael, I think I'll maybe leave it to you of introducing yourself here, because I know you have a lot in this space.
Sure. Michael Gonzalez have been on the board, I think, since the Chicago conference, which is maybe what, 5 or 6 years ago. Was a HR professional, Kim, and then and so you're always dabbling in the DE&I work by nature of what we do. And then for the last 10 plus years at Hallmark, I was doing the DE&I work exclusively for the corporation. Had planned to retire and then had moved in kind of serendipitously into the consulting work around diversity, equity, and inclusion. It is a rewarding but yet challenging field, but I truly believe in it. And even in the things we're going to talk about today, it will play into programming and events as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Next, we have Jane Hyun, who is a leadership strategist, coach, and author. She wrote probably the most well-known book within the NAAAP circle of Breaking the Bamboo Ceiling. And I've had the pleasure of meeting her and hearing her speak at our National Leadership Academy. So Jane's been involved with a number of different events with NAAAP, and she's been on the board for a couple of years now, I believe, as well. And certainly has done some great work with many of these very well-known organizations that you see on the slide here. But Jane, we'd love to hear from you if you can unmute.
Yep, thanks, Newlyn, and it's a pleasure to be with you guys. And thanks so much for joining this conversation and willingness to participate and engage. I think I've been involved with NAAAP kind of as a participant here in New York. When I used to work in the corporate world, but also as an invited speaker and now with the board members. So looking forward to that conversation and really sharing some of these ideas with the other colleagues that are on this panel. So, welcome and look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Jane. And last but certainly not least, we have Elizabeth Yang, who is the CEO of NLaw Mediation Offices of Elizabeth Yang. Elizabeth has been a NAAP board member for a number of years now, and I've worked with her in the realm of some of the self-care and wellness programs. And so I know that she has a lot of background in this topic of really understanding the ins and outs specific to the law with this. And so we're really excited to hear about her expertise and really get to pick her brain a little bit today. And when it comes to the program side of things and all the things that come with it. And so Elizabeth, if you can unmute, we'd love to hear from you.
Thank you, Newlyn, for moderating this for us today. It's a great honor to be here alongside other NAAP board members speaking on this very important topic today. I've been part of NAAP since 2006 as the LA chapter president and the national president, and now on the board. One of my areas of expertise in the legal industry is intellectual property. And so I'm bringing my knowledge and experience today to share with everyone what to watch out for in terms of trademark and copyright infringement, in terms of planning events for organizations going forward. So thanks everyone for being on today with us, and welcome.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And so with that, we really have a very strong panel today. I'm very excited to be moderating this with all of you, and we'll do our best to get to questions again as they come in. But really, before we get into the specific subject matter of what we're talking about, I'd love to just go down the line here, and we can start with Kim on this one, of really kind of answering the question, what made you want to speak on this panel, and with this topic in general, what made you want to do this session? So how about Kim, can we start with you, and then we'll move down the line here.
Perfect, thank you. I think there's a lot of things, a lot of reasons for being part of this conversation today. And I would just say that the top 3 reasons why is, the first is that, I have that slogan, better safe than sorry. And while I believe in, relying on recommendations and resources and just counting that the information I'm receiving is the right information and accurate, that sometimes I move too fast. And I wanted to share just a couple of stories around why verifying information before selecting someone is important, because it's both costly and it could impact the organization's reputation. The second is that, sometimes we expect a certain speaker to act in a certain way based on, what the conversations that we've had, but then it ends up being something different. And so I felt like I wanted to share my experience as to how it impacts the employee population, and also how it impacts any future potential employees that join the organization, or applicants or candidates that that are interested in joining your group, your organization, or your company. And then finally, I just, I think we all learn from storytelling, and I think we all learn from, just mistakes that people make. And oftentimes we don't have a forum like this where we can just be real and offer just, advice on a variety of different situations. And I felt like this would be a good panel to be a part of, since at NAAAP, what we want to do is encourage and make and build leaders. And this is just a perfect platform to do that.
I love that. Thanks, Kim, for sharing that. Let's move on to Michael, if you wouldn't mind sharing.
Yeah, it was really interesting as this panel was talking months ago about what we wanted to share and what we wanted this to be. And to Kim's point, is we kind of all reflected back on stories or lessons learned through what we had experienced in either putting on a conference or participating in one. And as you had mentioned, Newlyn, Kansas City was lucky enough to hold the conference a couple of years ago. And what I learned about the importance of being on point the whole time was invaluable. And I think the amount of work and the pressure and the expectations that would come with putting on an event is that it's easy to get derailed. And so what you really have to do is to make sure that you bring on a team that's committed and focused. And the way that they're going to be committed and focused is for them to understand and participate in identifying what you want that event to be, the North Stars you'll hear me speak and mention all the time. And then once you do that, there's just some general rules of the road, is that you trust each other, you lean on each other, you learn to help each other. And that minimizes the surprises, and you get all on the same page. And it's got to be fresh. One of the things that we talked about was there are so many conferences and conventions and meetings that we go to, and they're predictable. And so what could we do to be unconventional, to be kind of doing something, daring to get to the edge, but still also looking at ways to make that content valuable for all of the attendees. And you do that, it still doesn't mean that there's not going to be tough work in putting an event on or a conference on, but you minimize all of the unnecessary issues that will come up. And trust me, there's going to be real ones that come up, but you have more time to devote to those. So
Great response there, Michael. I think, especially like you had mentioned, that there's virtual has become such a common thing now, and there's so many, the accessibility to conferences is such a common thing now. So I think differentiating, like you said, is a huge piece, and I'm sure we'll get into that in a little bit here. So thank you for sharing that. Let's move on to Jane.
Yeah, I really appreciate what Kim and Michael has already said. And I think to carry on that theme, I just thought, as being involved with not just NAAAP, but other organizations, I've probably spoken at hundreds of different organizations over the last 20 years. And so just kind of from the speaker's point of view, as well as kind of from an organizational point of view, I thought it would be really great and helpful and beneficial for us as an organization to be thinking very thoughtfully about how do we approach engage and how do we approach and engage speakers? How do we work with them? How do we treat them? How do we decide if they're right for our organization? I just thought the topic was just really interesting. And I think, to Kim's point about really elevating who we are as an organization, because we have to kind of, show to the outside world how we want to be treated, right, as an organization. And I think it's important that that we kind of bring those guidelines. And I think also maybe thinking and talking and brainstorming with everyone about what are the guidelines that we have about how do we approach these relationships. We're going to have speakers and trainers who are going to be speaking who that's their full-time role. Like Michael and I are consultants, but Elizabeth and Kim have other roles they play. We've all spoken, right, at different events at NAAAP. And so, if we ask people to speak and some of them want to do it pro bono, like how do we work with that beyond that, right? And there's so many things that we have to think about and talk about. So I just really like the topic because I thought it would be a really great idea for us to think about these in a more methodical way and think about how do we proceed in the most professional and the most excellent way, and how do we create events that are aligned with who we want to become as an organization. So those are just some thoughts of what attracted me to this. And of course, having you as a moderator, Newlyn, wasn't bad.
I appreciate that. And I love what you said there about, the relationship piece. As we talked about branding and really bringing our organization to the next level, I think that's going to be a huge piece. And I'm really excited to hear you talk a little bit more about that, Jane. So thank you for sharing. All right, let's wrap up this question. Elizabeth, if you could answer this question, then we'll move on to some more other content here.
Yeah, absolutely. Kim, Michael, Jane, and I, we've all had our share of experience planning various events, not just within NAAAP, but also outside with other organizations within our jobs. And so each of us brings to the table different experiences about issues that we've seen during the course of planning multiple events. And so when some of these issues were brought to light, we decided like, look, people would just get thrown into the event planning process without much guidance. Usually it starts with an idea for some kind of event that they want to share with an audience, but that's about it. There's not much guidance. Definitely no one consults with an attorney or with some kind of professional as to what to watch out for. And in my legal arena, I see my fair share of cease and desist letters. Most of the time they're being sent to folks that have no ill intent, and it was just based off of ignorance, a lack of knowledge of the law, doing something that they didn't know they were not supposed to do. But by the time that cease and desist letter comes, it's too late, and now they have a bigger problem on their hand than before. So what we're here to do is prevent any event planning process from getting to that troublesome arena, bringing the steps one is supposed to take to properly plan an event, know what issues to watch out for, and nip it in the bud before it gets too serious. So that's why we decided to put on this seminar today.
Thanks for sharing, Elizabeth. And the piece you mentioned there about the guidance, you didn't use this word, but really the platform of NAAAP, to develop those skills, I think is huge. And I think if we can provide that and really have that, you're way ahead, not just in your NAAP profession or in your NAAP role of just being better prepared and avoiding some of the things that you had talked about, but even in your professional world, I think having that preparation, having that skill set that you mentioned and building that up is a huge thing for our members. And so I love what you said there. So thank you, panelists, for sharing why we're here today. And we're actually going to throw a question back to our audience before we get into some specific questions. And really let's start with this. So really looking at, have you ever encountered unexpected challenges when planning an event or program, and what were they? And so let's use the chat here. We'll give it a few minutes for everyone to have a chance to put this in the chat. But if you want to go into a long explanation, that's fine. Or if you just want to put 2 words, hopefully cease and desist aren't 2 those words. But let's go to the chat here, and if everyone could share an experience or share something that's been a challenge when planning these events or programs, that would be great. And while we're doing that, here we go. The challenge is finding qualified speaking in a short time frame. Renee, and let me know if I'm saying your name wrong. Yeah, I can definitely empathize with that one. That one's tough. A speaker who bails. Oh, Cindy, that's that's a brutal one. Yeah, so hopefully that doesn't happen too often, but that's a big one. And Terrence, yeah, actually, if anyone wants to unmute and talk to any of these topics too, I'm actually going to stop sharing my screen so we can see our panelists as we move here into some more panel discussion. But I think, Terrence, we're going to talk about that today. I think that's a massive one, I would say, especially in a virtual setting of engaging speakers, right? I mean, that's having been on both sides of that, of being on something that's maybe not as engaging, as well as maybe being that speaker. I can definitely empathize with that one. And Cindy, yeah, those two kind of go hand in hand. You might have someone who's great in one realm, but maybe not great in others. How do you really vet that out? And then Renee, conflict about sharing their views while we're thinking about employer obligation. Renee, I don't know if you're able to unmute, but I'd love to hear maybe a little bit more about that one.
Yeah, right now there's a program that we're trying to identify speakers for. There's a lot of different leaders, directors, VPs that we could ask, but the thing is that they all work at companies that I just don't know if it would be a conflict for them to be speaking on our panels. In light of that, they do work at a big company. They all work at big companies, most of them. So I'm just not really sure if it's a good idea or not. And it does scare me in a way to ask them, not knowing what kind of ramification it could have for them, depending on what they say, because they don't always know what they're going to say on the panel until it's said. And sometimes the panel's recorded.
Can I just follow up on that, Renee? I mean, you hit it on the head because a lot of times the relationship, if it's like let's say the person on the panel offers a service to your organization, and they may say something that missteps, and then all of a sudden we don't want to do business with that panelist. I mean, that has been a huge horror story for me, especially when, you know, we're inviting the speaker to kind of play full out, bring their authentic self. The reason we're inviting them is because they have an interesting story, but yet because the people that didn't participate in the event didn't get the context to what the person was saying, it gets misinterpreted. And, you know, what should have been a very engaging conversation with an ERG or a VRG or just an employee resource group of some sort turns into a political game or some other nonsensical thing that didn't really, you know, wasn't really the original intent. And then oftentimes those emotions kind of blend in. So yeah, I can see that that's definitely an interesting feat to be up against. One way that we did get around that is instead of asking them to speak on that topic, we generically asked them if we could share that concern, but not put their name attached to it. So if we gave them the questions ahead of time, but yet they said something like, you know, this is a sensitive topic, I don't want my name to be attached to it, but you as the moderator, if you wanted to share this feedback, but make it anonymous, then that would be completely fine because it wouldn't be related to the person actually saying that information. So that is one way that we've gone about that situation to protect all parties.
Thanks for sharing that on Cam. I think, like you mentioned, I mean, that's something I think we might not think about on the offset, but it certainly can have some cascading effects down the line, right? When we engage in some of those relationships. And so let's get into some of our questions here, and we'll kind of back it up, because I think that question is a really good one that we're certainly going to come back to, but we're going to kind of go to the beginning of this whole process. So even before you have a speaker, before you have a program set up or an event, really kind of going to the something that Michael had mentioned in his introduction of the North Star. And so when you're looking at speakers, we're looking at trainers, events, and then you kind of have that side of it. How does that, how do we really mix that with our mission, with our North Star, and how do we make sure we stay true to that? And so, Michael, I'd love to kind of put that question of you of how do we make sure those things align when we're evaluating them, when we're considering them, and just through the whole process.
Sure, Newlyn. One of the things I think that we have to do, and it's really hard to do because all of us are moving at such a warp speed pace, and that we also are doing many things at once, is to, and I've been on the speaker side where I've gone to a conference and it has been well orchestrated, well planned, and I've been on other ones where it just wasn't. And as a speaker, that does leave a, somebody says, hey, I got asked to speak at this conference. What do you think? I'm going to say, here was my experience. But being on the planning stage, it may sound a little counterintuitive, because immediately you want to jump into the deep end of the pool, start sourcing speakers, start to get venues and everything placed, when we really haven't had time to really understand, articulate, and appreciate everybody on the team's perspective about what do we want it to be? What's that North Star? What, at the end of the day, at the end of that conference, when all the people leave, from the speakers to the attendees, that we stayed true to. And so the idea of sitting there and actually having a few sessions where you just ideate and come up with something that everybody feels good about, that is going to be your mortar when times get tough, because you don't deviate from that. Now, it's not to say that there isn't something unforeseen that may come in and have you pivot or call an audible, but for the most part, if you've laid that out, it makes things so much easier, not only from how you're going to garner volunteers who now understand the North Star of what you want this conference or convention to be, but even when you go out and the person responsible for programming goes out and understands the essence of what this conference will be as he or she is going out to solicit speakers. Then what I would suggest is that you share that with the speaker. It gets a little tough if you're working through an agency. And that's where I say, be bold, ask that agency that you do want face time with those speakers that they're volunteering up, because even they're going to tell you everything is great and they can absolutely talk about this topic and they can leave a great impression with the attendees. But you need to vet that out to make sure that that is in fact true, because it's not always true. And the other thing I liked what Kim always mentions is the storytelling. So I was at one conference and here's my implicit bias. The guy was going to talk about statistics around D&I numbers and compliance. And I go, in my head, I'm going, oh my God, this is going to be the driest thing ever. But he story told as he was giving you all of the data and how they set it up and how they measure. And then he would talk about a story between two of the data analysts that had gotten into a whole area that they hadn't thought of before. And he made it really entertaining. So I think by going and interviewing those individuals, you're going to know if it aligns with what your team wants the convention to be. And then the other thing I think what I would close with is that you share this vision constantly with your team, with the sponsors, with the volunteers, so that you never really lose sight of that, because there are going to be some times where people will want to go back over the fence, as I call it. A decision's already made. It's not going to add value. So move forward. And I think you do that by just continually talking about this vision or North Star.
And there's been some, okay, thank you, Jane, for answering that one. So yeah, a couple of things came up, Michael, while you were talking about that. I think we'll circle back with some of these, because I think just based on some of the questions, they link in great with some of our other topics with this, but really appreciate you sharing that, of really, kind of always going back to that and really starting there. And then naturally, as we kind of progress down through that, we've determined this is the experience we want people to have. Here's how it does align with our mission and our vision. Really, one of the big things is then, well, we want to come out with some kind of branding and title. And I think Elizabeth, with you're probably the best person on this call to talk about this with your intellectual property background. But how do you really, what are some things maybe as we're kind of moving down this process of we've kind of identified our core, and now we want to do some branding and some basic stuff around it. What are some things we should really be aware of as we go down that process?
Yeah, thanks, Newlyn. Actually, before I get into the trademark aspect of it, I wanted to add on top of what Michael said. So usually on an event planning team, when a team gets together to plan an event, they come up with a topic and then they brainstorm speakers, and then they reach out to those speakers to ask if the speakers will speak. But rather than jumping straight into that, I would suggest coming up with an agenda of exactly what you would like the speaker to speak on, and then propose that to the potential speakers to get their permission and consent, and see if they're willing to speak on these topics before even asking them to speak. That will eliminate the problem of bringing in a speaker and then they end up speaking on something that you didn't plan them to speak on, or them either not having the knowledge or speaking on something completely irrelevant. So having that agenda in place and having that line of communication as an entryway to get to know the speaker before even asking them to speak, I think is critical to the success of an event. In terms of coming up with the title of an event, that has to do with intellectual property law. And a lot of folks don't know that many names and titles and phrases are trademarked by owners, by entrepreneurs who are using those names in commerce. Even very mundane marks that people are using on a regular basis, those often are trademarked as well. And so before coming up with a title, it's important to go and see if that name is trademarked. It could be as easy as going on Google and just searching with quotes. If you do quotes, it searches for that exact phrase to see if any other companies are using it, or going on the United States trademark website and just doing a quick search to see if that name is owned by anybody. Because otherwise, if you just come up with a name and put it on the flyer and start advertising it, if the trademark owner ends up finding out that their name is being used in conjunction with a topic that they've already got protected under US trademark law, then a cease and desist letter is going to come, and then you end up having to change the name, change all the content that has already been prepared, and it's a big hassle that way. So I'll stop there, but I'll get into copyright law on top of that later as well.
Thanks for sharing, Elizabeth. I think, I'm just kind of making a note here. I feel like this is something we could talk about for another hour on itself, of just, how do we use stuff that's not copyright infringement? How do we do things that aren't in that realm? So certainly something, again, that we can circle back on, but I really appreciate you sharing that. And so, kind of going back to our process here, we've identified our North Star. We've really kind of done our homework. We've searched things and tried as hard as possible to make sure that our branding and our title really aren't conflicting, like Elizabeth shared there, of any kind of trademark or anything that we can see. And then really next, and this is one thing I think worth calling out that the panelists have shared so far, is a lot of this goes into before you even talk to a speaker, right? But and before you even get to that part of the process. But when it does come time to find a great speaker and trying to match them with your event, how can we really make sure that it does align? I think we've already gotten some good tidbits on this, but I'd love Jane to answer this one of how do we really, again, make sure that speaker aligns with what we're trying to accomplish and our mission here.
Yeah, and the topic is so vast, we could probably spend hours on figuring out how to get this right. But as I thought about the question about how do we identify speakers that are aligned with who we are as an organization and who we want to be, and that represents us well, right? I thought of a couple things. I thought about content, right? What is it that they offer, and what is sort of their messaging around what they're going to talk about? So you might have a theme, like Elizabeth said, of what you want to accomplish in that event and the North Star that you want to lead with for your conference or event. But what is it that they are going to talk about, and how they're going to do that? And then the second piece around messaging, like the foundational themes that they're going to be teaching, would be helpful to know, right? At least in an outline form or a general sense of that. And then 3, I was thinking about relevance to our audience, and that's comes in a lot of forms as well. But we have young Asian professionals that are in our membership that go to our events, that are involved with our conferences and our chapter events. And so, does the speaker understand that audience, right? Does the speaker recognize the uniqueness of the Asian American experience and can speak to that, right? And I've seen, I've been at events where sometimes they're kind of cringeworthy, right? Like there are these speakers that are not of Asian descent that kind of talk about Asians, but using these stereotypes and these broad generalizations that, you kind of are like, oh goodness, like what do we do now, right? And so I think it'd be helpful to know what we're going to get, right? To understand how they're going to speak about our experience in that way. So the other piece that's connected to that is how do we find speakers that value diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? Because I know that that's a strong value of the organization. And so have they demonstrated that in some way? Are they supportive of Asian Americans and other ethnic and racial groups in some way? Do they know something about us and the fact that we're not a monolith and that we have these subgroups of Asians living across the country? Are they aware of some of that? They don't have to be an expert, but I think have they done some homework to understand who we are, to value and appreciate who we are as well? And does their messaging and content bring something of value to our audience, right? Has a certain point of view on it. And then, of course, any practical takeaways that they offer, 1 or 2 things are helpful. As far as getting some insight into how the speaker works and what they've spoken about, I think it would be important to get some sort of a reference or a testimonial from at least 2 or 3 reputable organizations or people, or a sample speaker reel that is representative of how they talk about a certain topic. And so I would say that would be something we can ask for and look for some of that. So, and for me, this is important too, is kind of how are we kind of looking at this with kind of an eye on excellence and quality? Is this the kind of speaker that we want representing us? How are we going to work with them? How do we get into all the contractual stuff? But I think we have other topic items that we can cover on that. But immediately speaking, those are the key things that came to mind, Newlyn, about how do we identify speakers that are aligned with our values and who we want to be.
Absolutely. And I think a key phrase there is, doing our homework, right? Because I think, and this was a question we got earlier, which I think we can circle back to once we get to our last question here is, if there's a quick turnaround, then how do I do that? And it is kind of tough because what we're talking about, there's a lot of stuff that goes into doing our homework correctly, what we're talking about, and really laying that foundation so we can potentially prevent a lot of these problems from happening and kind of save ourselves some trouble there. But Kim had mentioned in the chat too, some agencies like the National Speakers Association, I think that lend themselves to some credibility for speakers. And actually, Kim, I'd love to go to you kind of for our other question here as we think about the process is, let's say we've done all our homework, we've really tried to cross our T's with everything and done everything we can. What are some ways that we can protect ourselves, our chapter and NAAAP, even if something were to happen in that case?
Well, the first thing you need to do is own up to the mistake, like fess up and just say, hey, this is an issue and we need to talk about it. I think in my personal experience on this is that we tried to save face, and instead of acknowledging that something had happened or to make right, we just ignored it, and it ended up being a lawsuit or some sort of letter that says you didn't meet your part of the obligation, company, so we're gonna we're going to send you a bill that looks like this, and if you don't pay it, we're going to. And actually, I work for really large companies, and we receive collection agency or collection notices for bills that we thought, we had paid, but because we didn't meet our obligation, it turned into something, ugly. And that's something we have to be very, very cognizant of. I mean, going back to the basics, ensuring that both parties, both the event planners or the folks that are hosting the event and the people that we're bringing to the table, that there are no hidden agenda, hidden messages, that we're very clear and concise around what exactly they're going to be talking about. And that's going to be important. Somebody asked the question around, we don't have a whole lot of money, so how do we negotiate prices? So I did find, I solicited some of my event planners, and this is some of the suggestions that they came up with. Nowadays, people know that we're strapped for cash. And if you immediately say, I work for a nonprofit organization, my chapter in Kansas City has 101 different business, different, experts, we're willing to negotiate. A lot of times these speakers don't have the extra, funds for marketing, for a platform to sell their products. I've seen companies or speakers get creative on, let me do an Instagram, let me have, access to your Instagram so I can sell a product, or, put my link on your page. I mean, there's ways to offer things that could actually help the individual without having cash or money. And this has actually been like big companies, organizations I've been a part of. We didn't pay for events. Like, we had to negotiate other offers. Like, we would have speakers for your event, or we would do donations because we couldn't pay for services. So we would do donations to their organization. And in a lot of cases that helped us in that regard. But you're right. I mean, these national speakers associations, I think, really do give us an opportunity to think outside the box, but also know too, things like your national high school speaker events. You have debate groups that are really good speakers. You have people who aren't have 20 plus years of experience that actually could be speakers at your events. It's just a matter of what that topic is, and just really, getting the right person to speak at that event. So it doesn't necessarily have to be an expert per se that has 20 plus years of experience. You just have to think outside the box.
I was going to just add that this is a great list, Kim, because I so creative, right? Like, how else can you compensate and reward someone for speaking if you don't have the funds? And I think we could probably come up with a lot more ideas, right? That could be beneficial to what they're looking for, because they may have some objectives as well. But I think it's important to think about, if you want to ask someone to do a pro bono event, if they do this kind of work for a living, we shouldn't expect them to keep doing it for free. You know what I mean? And so I think there comes to the point of like, you want me to speak to like 5-year chapters? Like, like that's a little pushing it, right? And we have to honor that they're doing it for a living. This is their bread and butter. And so it's different from asking like a VP of something at a company, right? That they're just doing it because they have extra time and they want to speak about the topic. So I think if we can honor and treat those speakers with that kind of mutual respect, I think some people will speak for free, right? For that opportunity and some of the things that you just talked about.
Well, and I would agree with both Kim and Jane on that. If you go through a speakers bureau, or you go through an individual where this is their livelihood, you're going to probably, the expectation is they need to be reimbursed, right? But there's a lot of corporations that are asking their leadership teams to get involved with organizations or the community, and they will do that pro bono, because that is part of what the company is asking them to do. And a lot of those individuals really come from a critical, valuable space because they're living in that topic right now. So that would be another option, is for you to look at an organization and see if in fact they encourage their employees to go out and speak on whatever their discipline is or whatever their industry does.
Great response there, and I think we've got a lot of questions in our box here. I don't think we'll get to all of them, unfortunately, but I just want to take a few here. I know Renee had one around, and I think this is probably, if we if we could figure this out, we'd all be set, I think. So it's I'm going to throw a curveball at our panelists here because it's a tough question, but really identifying topics that would bring in a large crowd and how to find popular topics that are trending with AAPI professionals. I think, again, this is a tough one, but I think, I don't know if anyone has any thoughts around that, of anything you've seen that to kind of get ahead of it as opposed to being reactive. And I think there was a question earlier about trying to find a speaker quickly. So maybe there's a way to get ahead of this and really be proactive in finding speakers that fit that bill and really are engaging and can bring in a large crowd. Now, no need to apologize, Renee. That's a really good question. It's a tough one, but I would love to hear what our panelists think about it.
You know, I think we just ask, or you sample. When some of my talks that I did a year ago was anticipating this new young professional, very diverse professional that was entering the workforce. And so I started to prepare my presentations on that, not only because I thought it was an invigorating topic, but it was real. And this is what organizations were going to be needing and understanding. I went and talked to recruiting departments and asked how they were recruiting young professionals. And then I went to universities and asked what they were experiencing. And that was one where I wish I could say that it was just serendipitous. I just figured that was on the horizon. I did that simply by kind of looking at what the landscape was and just going and asking. They could have very well been, yeah, it's not of any interest, and I had to pivot. But just ask, you'd be surprised.
One of the ways that I would suggest, actually social media, there's ways, like if you're an Instagrammer, there's ways to figure out which hashtags are trending. And usually when someone posts an Instagram post, they will tag all of those hashtags on there because that makes their post more visible. The same with Facebook as well. Facebook actually has a page insights page where you can go on there and manually look for posts that have gotten high reach or engagement in the recent months. And then it'll tell you, like, these are the topics that your audience are most interested in, and use that as the future topics for events.
I was recently sent a bunch of entries to kind of an essay writing contest that high school students and college students and grad students were doing around the topic of Stop AAPI Hate. And it was interesting that they had like different categories of what they wrote about. And the key theme was obviously around what we've been experiencing as a community, with the pandemic, right? The increased discrimination and all the different things that's been going on. But it was interesting that the questions they were covering were, what did you learn about yourself as an Asian American and your identity in this whole time? The other one was, which I thought was interesting, was about what solutions do you recommend, for these schools and institutions as well. So I just thought that topic could be a broad enough topic, I think, that would draw a lot of people. I think it wouldn't just draw Asian Americans. I think it will be interesting enough for the broader population to understand what we've experienced, and for them to engage around it. So I just thought of that because I'm in it right now, and I'm looking at all these essays, and there's just really poignant stories that are coming out from these students, and just very meaningful to see.
Thanks everyone for sharing that. Yeah, I think again, definitely a tough question, but hopefully Renee, you were able to get some good insight from our great insight, excuse me, on our panel here. I think just kind of keeping an eye on the clock here, I think we want to try to hit maybe one more question before we do a recap, but let's see here. I think the one that's interesting was really engaging speakers. I think, you've all laid out really good steps of kind of vetting people and trying to do that. I don't know if there's anything that came to mind while we were talking, I think especially in the virtual world of this, of how you can really either maybe tips for being an engaging speaker or finding engaging speakers, because quite frankly, over Zoom, it can be a lot more difficult, right? And so I think I'd love to hear from all of you what you think about that because unfortunately, I think well, actually, it's great because it's more accessible, across Zoom, but it's certainly not going anywhere now that it's just kind of our new normal, right? And so I see Kim is unmuted, so I'd love to hear from Kim on this one.
Yeah, what's interesting is we paid top dollar for a very engaging speaker that we had seen back in 2018, and just amazing. African-American female, just super articulate, funny as can be. And we hired her about 6 months ago, and it was via Zoom, and she fell flat. Like I felt so bad for her because she tried to be funny and comical. She tried to be engaging. Some of the activities that she tried to do, nobody was paying attention. So what we ended up doing is to kind of make up for that event is she had a recording of a previous event. And so what she did is she took a little bit of that content, redid the session in a more video-based form, and she did snippets of it and sent it to our teams. And it made up for the lack of kind of being engaging, kind of falling flat, and yet it did help showcase her in a different way. And so there are a variety of creative ways should that run flat. I mean, I personally have not been part of a conference that's been via Zoom that has been super engaging. I mean, the only part of it that's been super engaging is when we do breakout sessions, but then it's just getting to know people. That's been the most unscripted, just kind of raw, tell me how things are going. Those discussions, I think, have been the most beneficial for me. So when you speak to a speaker, I think you ask them, how creative can you be? Let's think outside of the box. And I don't think that's a question that we typically ask speakers because we just assume it's going to be a face-to-face dynamic. But one of the questions I've started asking is, okay, what happens if you fall flat? How are you going to recover from that? And what are some ways that we'll be able to kind of re-engage the teams? And they should be able to give you a list of those topics. But the video playback, I think, is really, it will help you kind of re-engage your teams as well. And just going back to somebody asking about, maybe they are too expensive to do a live event or a Zoom event, but if you ask them for a recording from a previous session, that may be a cheaper way to get their topic in front of your group. So it doesn't have to always be a live event, just something of content that you can share with other people.
Yeah, Kim, I would agree with you 100%. Part of it's personal is that individuals that you saw live that are animated, that walk across the stage, that are just in the moment, doesn't always translate well in Zoom. And so you have to do your due diligence to make sure that their messaging does fit this virtual world that we're in now. And if not, what I prefer is sessions like this, where a lot of mine is, I've got to walk up and down the stage. And so I go, is there an opportunity? I just accepted one where I said I would do it if it was more of an interview, because it's interactive at that point between me and the moderator, and then we will have questions coming in from the audience, because I don't think I do presentations well through Zoom as I do in person.
Yeah, and I've done very similar things that you guys just said, just shortening that presentation. You can't do an hour, one person speaking. It's just not going to work on Zoom, 15, 20 minutes tops. And then, Michael, to your point, having some sort of a dialogue or an interview, fireside chat, however you want to do it, with at least one other person. Sometimes they bring in one or two other people in addition to their internal leaders. So yeah, I think the traditional way of one person speaking, in front of a crowd, that doesn't work on Zoom. It's not effective.
Yeah, it creates Zoom fatigue. That's why even for this webinar, we decided no longer than 1 hour and make it interactive, have the audience ask questions.
Perfect segue there, Elizabeth. I am keeping an eye on the time, and I think I really appreciate all the questions in the chat, all the engagement. Hopefully, we passed the engagement test for all of our attendees today. I think I really want to thank our board members and Cindy for their time and for their dedication to the mission and everything we're doing. And I think really I took a bunch of notes today as the moderator, so hopefully everyone else got a lot out of it as well. But I think just really I think this was great and really fit what the board members really wanted to accomplish today, really helping us raise our level. And so I just want to thank them for their time in this. And we will be sending some follow-up items with this. And so as part of that, we'd love to hear from you, everyone in the audience, of what are topics you would like to hear about from board members. And so we'll be sending out some information about that as we move along here and as we continue with a series like this. But again, I just want to thank our board members for their time today, for spending it with us, and for sharing some really great insight. And to our audience members for their participation and for joining us and giving us an hour of your day today. So we are right at 5:30, or about an hour. So I think we'll call it there and stop the recording. But again, thank you everybody for attending, and we will do this again soon.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.